The gym fell silent as Caleb Monroe approached the deadlift platform. Wearing his gray janitor uniform, sweat stains visible under his arms, he stood out among the athletic wear and designer brands. Snickers rippled through the room. A personal trainer whispered something to his client, and they both laughed. Someone pulled out a phone, ready to capture what they assumed would be a humiliating moment. Caleb ignored them all, methodically wrapping his calloused hands around the bar loaded with 441 pounds of weight. The laughter stopped abruptly when he lifted it off the ground with controlled power, his face a mask of quiet determination. Have you ever been judged by the job you do, by the clothes you wear? Well, watch what happens when a man doesn't need to say a word and an entire room falls silent. Caleb Monroe hadn't always been the janitor at Elite Fitness. 38 years of life had carved deep lines around his eyes that spoke of experiences most gym-goers would never understand. 12 years as a Marine had shaped him into a man of few words and deliberate actions. He'd been honorably discharged after a helicopter accident in Afghanistan left him with a titanium rod in his left leg and a Purple Heart that stayed buried in a drawer at home. The military had given him discipline, strength, and an unshakable resilience. It had also given him the title of 3-time deadlift champion in his weight class across all branches of the armed forces. But that was a lifetime ago. Before Sophie, his wife, lost her battle with cancer. Before little Josie, now 8 years old, became his entire world. Caleb worked the night shift at Elite Fitness, mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, and maintaining equipment from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. The job offered just enough to keep their modest 2-bedroom apartment and provide for Josie's needs. More importantly, it allowed him to be present during the day for school drop-offs, homework, and dinner together. His routine never varied. After walking Josie to school, he would return home for 4 hours of sleep before picking her up. They'd spend the afternoon together, homework, cooking, sometimes a trip to the park, before Mrs. Alvarez from next door would come over to stay with Josie while he worked. 3 times a week, he would use his employee benefit of free gym access, coming in during his break to maintain the physical strength that had once defined him. Once a week, Josie would find him watching the street door of his gym, wondering what her father had been telling him to do, to maintain the physical strength that had once defined him. He never spoke about his military career or his accomplishments. The photos of him standing on podiums with medals around his neck existed only in photo albums that Josie sometimes asked to see. "Tell me about when you were a hero, Daddy," she would say, and he would smile and tell her that being her father made him more proud than any medal ever could. 6 months ago, when a personal training position had opened up at Elite Fitness, Caleb had quietly submitted an application. Despite his extensive military training background and proven athletic achievements, the manager had taken one look at his resume and shaken his head. "Look, Monroe, you're a good worker and we appreciate what you do around here," the manager had said, not quite meeting his eyes. "But our clients expect a certain image. You understand, right? No formal certification, no fitness industry experience. Plus you're..." Well, he gestured vaguely at Caleb's scarred hands and the slight limp he still carried. "Our brand caters to aspiration. We need trainers who embody what our clients want to become." Caleb had nodded once, returned to his mop, and never mentioned it again. He didn't need the extra money or recognition. Every time Josie wrapped her small arms around his neck and declared him the strongest daddy in the world, he had all the validation he needed. His strength had a purpose, to be there for his daughter, to protect her. Everything else was noise. When Josie had asked him last week if he was still as strong as in the photos, he'd simply smiled and told her, "Strong enough for what matters." But later that night, staring at the ceiling, he'd made a quiet decision to push himself during his next gym session. Not to prove anything to the world, but to honor a promise he'd made to himself when Sophie died. To stay strong, to stay healthy, to be there for Josie as long as she needed him. So when his break came on this particular Tuesday afternoon, Caleb changed into his workout clothes but kept his gray janitor's shirt on. It was the only clean one he had. He headed to the weight room, focused only on the workout he had planned, unaware that his quiet presence was about to disrupt the carefully curated atmosphere of Elite Fitness. The moment Caleb pushed through the double doors into the main weight room, he could feel the atmosphere shift. The usual buzz of conversation dimmed momentarily as several pairs of eyes turned toward him. Most quickly looked away, but a group of 3 young trainers near the deadlift platform maintained their stare, exchanging glances with one another. Elite Fitness catered to the upper echelon of society, executives, entrepreneurs, and social media personalities who paid premium membership fees for top-of-the-line equipment and an exclusive environment. The late afternoon was peak hours for the Instagram crowd, those who came as much to be seen as to work out. Caleb kept his eyes forward as he walked through the room. The weight of stares pressed against him like a physical force, but years of military discipline had taught him to compartmentalize discomfort. He focused on his breathing, 4 counts in, 4 counts out, a technique that had carried him through far worse than social awkwardness. As he approached the deadlift platform, one of the young trainers, a man in his 20s with perfectly styled hair and a tight-fitting branded shirt stretched across his sculpted chest, stepped into his path. "Excuse me," the trainer said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Members only in this section." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Caleb reached into his pocket and produced his employee ID card without a word. The trainer glanced at it dismissively. "Oh, maintenance, right." He stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Don't hurt yourself on the equipment, buddy. Wouldn't want to file an incident report." Laughter rippled through the group behind him. A woman in matching neon workout gear nudged her friend. "Isn't that the guy who cleans the locker rooms?" "Yeah," her friend replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "I guess they let anyone in here now." Caleb walked past them to the platform, his face betraying nothing. He began his warm-up routine, methodically stretching his hamstrings, back, and shoulders. The whispers continued. "Look at him, he's still wearing his janitor's shirt. Probably can't afford proper gym clothes on that salary. Someone should tell him deadlifts aren't for beginners." A phone appeared in someone's hand, angled toward Caleb. "This is going to be gold," a voice murmured. The young trainer who had confronted him earlier was now speaking to a client but kept glancing over with barely concealed amusement. When Caleb began loading plates onto the bar, the trainer's eyebrows shot up. He excused himself from his client and sauntered over. "Whoa there, Chief," he said, hands raised. "Let me help you with that. That's way too much weight for someone at your level." Caleb continued methodically adding plates to the bar. "Seriously, man," the trainer persisted, his voice carrying an edge of condescension masked as concern. "That's 400+ pounds you're loading up. I can't let you do that, it's dangerous." "I thought—" A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the confrontation. The phone cameras were more obvious, no longer hidden. Someone snickered about "Janitor tries deadlift, instantly regrets it" being the perfect viral video title. For the first time, Caleb paused and turned to face the trainer. Their eyes met, and something in Caleb's steady gaze made the younger man take a small step back. There was no anger there, no wounded pride or embarrassment, just a calm, immovable presence that seemed suddenly larger than his 5'11" frame. "I appreciate your concern," Caleb said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. They were the first words he had spoken since entering the room, and they carried the weight of authority that couldn't be taught or bought. The trainer hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Look, we have a responsibility—" "I understand," Caleb interrupted gently. "I'll sign a waiver if you need one." Without waiting for a response, he turned back to the bar, adjusted the final plate, and secured the collar. 441 pounds exactly, his personal best from his military days. He hadn't attempted this weight in nearly a decade. The trainer stepped back, clearly torn between maintaining his authority and the growing sense that he had misjudged the situation. "Your funeral, man," he muttered, just loud enough to save face with his watching colleagues. Caleb didn't respond. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather belt, the same one he'd used in his competition days. As he wrapped it around his waist and tightened it with practiced movements, the room grew quieter. Something about his methodical preparation suggested this wasn't his first time. He stood before the loaded bar, feet shoulder-simp apart, toes pointed slightly outward. His breathing slowed as he centered himself, eyes focused on a point in the middle distance. The chattering, the stares, the phone cameras, all faded away as his world narrowed to just him and the weight before him. Caleb's hands, calloused from years of physical labor, gripped the cold metal bar. His fingers wrapped around it with the familiarity of greeting an old friend. He took one final deep breath, filling his lungs completely, then braced his core as he had done thousands of times before. The room had fallen into an expectant hush. Even those who had been laughing moments before sensed the shift in energy and watched with uncertain expressions. The young trainer who had tried to stop him crossed his arms, a defensive posture betraying his discomfort. Caleb bent at the hips, maintaining the natural arch in his lower back, knees bent at precisely the right angle. His form was flawless, the product of years of training and discipline. For a suspended moment, he was perfectly still, gathering his strength. Then he moved. The initial pull from the floor was the hardest part, the moment when inertia had to be overcome, when 441 pounds of dead weight fought against the laws of physics. Caleb's leg muscles tensed, bulging against the fabric of his work pants. The veins in his forearms stood out like rivers on a map as he pulled upward with controlled power. The bar broke free from the ground. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple as he continued the lift, keeping the bar close to his body, his back maintaining its rigid form. His breath came out in a controlled hiss between clenched teeth. This was the critical phase, the bar passing his knees, the transition to the hip hinge, the final drive to stand upright. The weight plates rattled slightly as the bar continued its upward journey. Someone in the crowd gasped audibly. The young trainer's crossed arms had fallen to his sides. Caleb drove his hips forward, shoulders pulling back as the bar rose past his thighs. The titanium rod in his left leg, the permanent reminder of his sacrifice, bore the weight without complaint. His face reddened with effort, but his eyes remained clear and focused. With a final surge of power, he locked out at the top of the lift, standing fully erect, shoulders back, the massive weight held steady in his grip. 441 pounds of iron, suspended in perfect balance. His chest expanded with controlled breath as he held the position. Time seemed to stop in the weight room. The only sounds were the distant thumping of music from the cardio area and Caleb's measured breathing. Not a single phone moved to capture the moment. All were lowered, as if recording it would somehow diminish its authenticity. The young trainer's face had drained of color. The women who had been whispering about the janitor stood motionless, eyes wide. An older man in expensive workout gear nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture of reluctant respect. Caleb held the weight for 3 seconds, textbook perfect, before beginning the controlled descent. With the same precision he had used to lift it, he lowered the bar gradually, maintaining perfect form until the plates touched the floor with a surprisingly gentle thud. He straightened up and released the bar. Without looking at anyone, he reached for the small towel tucked into his belt and wiped his hands. His breathing had already begun to normalize, another testament to his conditioning. The silence in the room was deafening. Caleb began methodically removing the weights from the bar and returning them to their proper racks. No one approached to help. No one dared break the spell with words. He cleaned his sweat from the equipment with the same care he used when performing his janitorial duties, leaving it spotless for the next user. When he had finished, he gave the platform one final survey to ensure everything was in order. Only then did he turn and walk toward the exit, his gait steady despite the enormous exertion. As he passed through the crowd, which parted unconsciously to make way for him, he didn't make eye contact with anyone. There was no triumphant smile, no challenging glare at those who had mocked him, just the same quiet dignity with which he had entered. Just before the door closed behind him, one of the young trainers, not the one who had confronted him but another who had laughed along, called out, "Hey man, that was something else." Caleb paused briefly, nodded once in acknowledgement, and continued through the door. In the locker room, away from the stairs, Caleb sat on a bench and allowed himself a moment of stillness. His muscles trembled slightly from the exertion, a reminder that while his body remembered the movement, it had been years since he had pushed himself to this limit. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, centering himself. It hadn't been about proving anything to them. It had been about keeping a promise to himself, about honoring who he had been and acknowledging who he was now, about being able to look Josie in the eye and know he was still the man he wanted her to believe he was. The locker room doors swung open and Caleb opened his eyes to see Marcus, the older gentleman who had nodded during his lift. In his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the lean build of a lifelong athlete, Marcus was a regular who usually kept to himself. "That was impressive work out there," Marcus said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone used to being listened to. Military? Caleb nodded. Marines. Marcus sat on the bench opposite him. Thought so. I was Army myself back in the day. Special Forces. They shared a moment of understanding that required no further explanation. You compete? Marcus asked. Used to, Caleb replied. 3-time Armed Forces champion, heavyweight division. Marcus let out a low whistle. And now, you're here, keeping this place running. It wasn't a question, and there was no pity in his voice, just a straightforward acknowledgement. Life happens, Caleb said simply. Marcus nodded. That it does. He reached into his gym bag and pulled out a business card, offering it to Caleb. I run a non-profit for veterans. Got a gym space where some of the guys meet up. Nothing fancy like this place, but good equipment, good people. Could use someone with your experience to come by, maybe share some pointers. Paid position? Caleb looked at the card but didn't take it. I appreciate the offer, but I've got a routine that works for my daughter and me. Night shift here, days with her. The offer stands, Marcus said, placing the card on the bench between them. No pressure, just veterans helping veterans. He stood up and extended his hand. Marcus Reeves. Caleb shook it firmly. Caleb Monroe. Good to meet you properly, Caleb Monroe, Marcus said with a nod. Those kids out there, they don't know what they don't know, but they'll remember what they saw today. After Marcus left, Caleb changed back into his full work uniform and slipped out through the service entrance. He had 15 minutes before his break ended, just enough time to walk to the elementary school 2 blocks away. Josie was waiting on the bench outside the after-school program, her blue backpack clutched in her lap, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already coming loose after a day of play. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made every sacrifice worthwhile. Daddy, she called, running to him and throwing her arms around his waist. He lifted her up with ease, her 45 pounds nothing compared to what he had just lifted, yet infinitely more precious. Hey, Pumpkin, how was school? I got an A on my science project. Mrs. Thompson said my solar system was the best one because all my planets were perfectly round. That's my girl, he said, setting her down and taking her backpack. Let's get Mrs. Alvarez and then head home. I'm thinking spaghetti for dinner tonight. With meatballs? Josie asked hopefully. With meatballs, he confirmed, taking her small hand in his as they walked. Josie chatted about her day, unaware of what had transpired at the gym, unaware of the stares her father had endured or the silent victory he had claimed. To her, he was simply Daddy, the man who checked for monsters under the bed, who knew how to braid hair even though his fingers were too big for the tiny elastic bands, who never missed a parent-teacher conference despite working all night. And for Caleb, that was enough. More than enough. The next day, when Caleb arrived for his shift, there was a noticeable difference in how people greeted him. The front desk staff, who had previously barely acknowledged his presence, offered a genuine, "Good evening." The closing manager made eye contact when giving him the nightly cleaning checklist instead of simply leaving it on the counter. Word had spread throughout the staff about what had happened in the weight room. The video that someone had started recording, expecting a moment of humiliation, had instead captured a display of quiet mastery. It had been shared among the employees, though thankfully not posted publicly. Elite Fitness had strict policies about filming in the gym. Around midnight, when the club was empty save for the security guard at the front desk, David Mercer, the general manager, sought Caleb out. Caleb was disinfecting the yoga mats when David cleared his throat from the doorway. Got a minute, Monroe? Caleb set down his spray bottle and clothed. Yes, sir. David gestured for him to follow, and they walked to the small office at the back of the club. David closed the door and took a seat behind the desk, motioning for Caleb to sit opposite him. So, David began, leaning forward with his hands clasped. I heard about what happened yesterday. Caleb remained silent, waiting. 441 pounds, David said, shaking his head slightly. That's more than anyone on our staff can lift, including our so-called strength specialists. It was just a workout, Caleb replied evenly. David studied him for a moment. I owe you an apology. When you applied for the trainer position, I made assumptions based on superficial things. I was wrong. Caleb shifted slightly in his chair but maintained his composure. No apology necessary. You made a business decision. A poor one, David admitted. I've been reviewing your application again. 3-time military champion, certified in physical training through the Marines, experience coaching other soldiers. He tapped a folder on his desk. Impressive resume that I failed to properly consider. He leaned back in his chair. I'd like to offer you a position, part-time to start, working with some of our more serious clients. Veterans, law enforcement, a few competitive lifters, people who care more about results than appearances. Caleb took a moment before responding. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Mercer, but my current schedule works for my family situation. My daughter needs me during the day. We could work around that, David pressed. Weekend sessions, early mornings before school, the pay would be significantly better than maintenance. Caleb looked down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, capable hands that had carried him through war, through grief, through the challenges of single parenthood. Hands that were good enough to clean toilets and good enough to lift more weight than anyone else in the building. I'm here because this job lets me be there for my daughter, he said finally, looking up. The hours work. The routine works. I'm not looking to change that right now. David nodded slowly, a new respect visible in his expression. I understand, but the offer remains open, and in the meantime, he slid a paper across the desk. I've approved a raise for your current position. Should have happened a while ago, given your reliability. Caleb glanced at the paper. A 15% increase. It would make a difference, allow him to start building Josie's college fund a little faster. Thank you, he said simply. David stood and extended his hand. Thank you for your service, Monroe, both to our country and to Elite Fitness. Later that week, when Caleb entered the weight room during his break, the atmosphere had changed noticeably. There were no stares, no whispers. Instead, several members nodded in greeting. The platform where he had performed his deadlift was unoccupied, though the gym was busy, as if it had been unconsciously reserved for him. As he began his warm-up, he noticed the young trainer who had confronted him watching from across the room. After a moment's hesitation, the trainer approached, his body language markedly different from their previous encounter. Hey, he said, stopping at a respectful distance. I wanted to apologize for the other day. I was out of line. Caleb paused his stretching and straightened up. Jason, the trainer added, extending his hand. Jason Reeves. Caleb, he replied, accepting the handshake. I know, Jason said with a sheepish smile. Everyone knows now. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Look, I was wondering, if you ever wanted to, your form was perfect, and I've been trying to improve my own deadlift technique. You want some pointers? Caleb finished for him. Yeah, Jason admitted. If you have time, no pressure. Caleb considered the young man before him, probably not much older than he had been when he joined the Marines. Cocky, but maybe not irredeemably so. I'm here Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, same time, he said. You're welcome to join. Jason's face brightened. Really? That would be awesome. Thanks, man. After Jason left, Caleb continued his workout, lifting a more moderate weight today. 350 pounds for his working sets. Still impressive, but not the statement he had made earlier in the week. He didn't need to prove himself again. As he finished his final set, he noticed a woman watching him from the stretching area. It took him a moment to recognize her as one of the pair who had made comments about the janitor during his previous session. She quickly looked away when their eyes met. Caleb cleaned the equipment, as always, and headed for the locker room. As he passed through the cardio area, he heard someone call his name. Turning, he saw Marcus, waving him over to where he was cooling down on a stationary bike. Thought that was you, Marcus said. How's the leg today? 441 pounds is no joke, especially with hardware. Caleb rotated his ankle unconsciously, a little sore, nothing serious. Marcus nodded knowingly. Ice it tonight. Trust me. He gestured to the treadmill beside him. Got a minute? Caleb checked his watch. He still had time before he needed to return to work. Just a quick cool down, Marcus said, seeing his hesitation. Caleb stepped onto the treadmill and set it to a comfortable walking pace. Been thinking about your situation, Marcus said, keeping his voice low. The single dad thing, the night shift, I respect that you've got priorities straight. Caleb maintained his steady pace, waiting. My veterans program, it's flexible. We meet Saturday mornings, but I could use someone to come by once a month, just to talk deadlift technique, Maybe share some of your military training experience? Good for the younger vets to see someone who's transitioned successfully. I'm just a janitor, Caleb said without self-pity. You're a father who's doing what needs to be done for his kid, Marcus corrected. That's success in my book. Caleb walked in silence for a few moments, considering. "Time Saturday a month," Marcus continued. "You bring your daughter if you need to. We've got kids' activities during the sessions. 2 hours of your time, decent compensation," he smiled. "And a chance to lift with people who won't be shocked when you load up the bar." For the first time since their conversation began, Caleb smiled slightly. "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," Marcus said, extending his hand. "And my offer to just come lift with us anytime stands, no teaching required." As Caleb's break ended and he returned to his maintenance duties, he found himself considering Marcus's offer. It would be good for Josie to meet other military kids, to understand that part of his life better. And he had to admit, there was something appealing about being in an environment where his strength and experience were valued rather than surprising. The night passed quickly, and before he knew it, his shift was ending. As he gathered his things from his locker, he noticed David Mercer entering the employee area earlier than usual. "Monroe," David acknowledged. "Good shift?" "Yes, sir," Caleb replied. "All tasks completed. Log is updated." David nodded. "Before you go, I wanted to let you know, the young man you had the interaction with, Jason, he came to me yesterday and specifically requested mentorship opportunities with you." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I told him that would be entirely up to you," David continued, "but it speaks volumes that someone who was so unprofessional now sees you as someone to learn from." He smiled slightly. "Just thought you should know the impact you're having around here." As Caleb walked home in the early morning light, he thought about impact, about ripples spreading outward from actions rather than words. He had never been one for speeches or self-promotion. Even in the military, his leadership had been by example, by quiet competence rather than charisma. Maybe there was a middle ground between being invisible and being in the spotlight, a way to honor his past without being defined by it, a path that would allow him to be the father Josie needed while also being true to other parts of himself. 1 week later, Caleb stood by the deadlift platform, observing Jason's form as the young trainer attempted 300 pounds. "Hips lower," Caleb instructed quietly. "Chest up. Engage your lats before you pull." Jason adjusted his position, taking Caleb's guidance seriously. His next attempt was markedly better, his form more efficient. "Good," Caleb said with a nod. "That's how you protect your back for the long haul." Across the gym, a new member asked one of the front desk staff about the unusual pair, the young, polished trainer taking instruction from a man in maintenance clothes. "Who's that guy?" the new member inquired. The staff member smiled, the only person who ever made this entire gym fall silent with a single lift. Near the entrance, Josie waited patiently on a bench, her homework spread out before her, occasionally glancing up to watch her father with pride. It was Saturday morning, and after Caleb finished his session with Jason, they would be heading to Marcus's veterans gym for the first time. Not as a teacher yet, but as visitors, testing the waters. Caleb caught Josie's eye and gave her a small smile. She beamed back, waving enthusiastically. In that moment, with his daughter's smile warming him from across the room, Caleb realized that the weight that truly mattered wasn't the 441 pounds he had lifted that day. It was the responsibility he carried every day as a father, the commitment to show up, to persist, to be present. The strength required wasn't just in his muscles but in his heart, the determination to provide Josie with everything she needed, even if it meant cleaning floors at night and swallowing his pride during the day. As he finished his session with Jason and walked toward Josie, Caleb felt a quiet contentment settle over him. His life wasn't perfect. It wasn't what he had planned when he was younger, but it was his, and he was making it work. One day, one decision, one deadlift at a time. You don't need to lift 441 pounds to prove your worth, but train anyway, not for applause, but to be strong enough for those who depend on you every day. Take care of your health, not just for yourself, but for those you love most.